Hi, I'm Rachel Whitefield, certified life coach, and with me is our resident voting vixen, Jackie Black. Thank you for joining us on another fabulous episode of Whiskey Bent
Spellbound with Black.
and Whitefield.
All right. Rachel, what are you drinking?
Jackie, I am so glad you asked. We paid the whiskey budget. I got a new bottle today. Mm-mm-mm.
Yes.
So, what I have on the show today is Yellowstone Handpicked Collection Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey Single Barrel, seventh generation family distillers. What are you
Ooh,
drinking today?
first of all, I love that bottle.
You know what? It even has like that like raised uh
Like
like part
label.
of the bottle here. Yeah, so it
Yeah,
says Yellowstone whiskey since 1872 with the Y on it. So, this is very exciting.
that's cool. I like it.
Yes. Little
I'm excited to
pioneering
hear how it
pioneering
tastes.
spirit here today.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
We'll get into
Fuck
it.
yeah, we
Yes.
are.
Okay, so what are you drinking? You've been
Listen,
teasing this to me for a while, so but I know you've been holding out drinking it until we
I
come to the
have
show.
because I just got back from Norway. Yet another trip. It's I'm never at home anymore. My cat is like, "Do you even live here?"
Well, thank God cats are like, yeah, thank you for getting me my own place, Mom.
Yeah, basically, this is his house, and I just visit for
Don't
short
worry.
periods of time. Like
He's left
no
without
longer
supervision.
than I'm never really here longer than 2 weeks at this point.
Yeah.
It is getting ridiculous. Like sometimes I'm just like, man, I really miss my couch. But I went to Norway. It is of all the places I have been this year, this is the most beautiful place I have ever been. And while I was
Mhm.
there, I got whiskey, and I don't know how to pronounce it. So it's spelled Myken, but, and as an American, we would say like Myken or
Yeah.
Meekin, right?
Hmm.
But when I was over there, I ordered a food and I tried to say it in their language, and then they corrected me because K's, I don't know if it's sometimes or all the times, but they are pronounced like CH. So
Yeah.
I think I say this Meechin.
Okay. Hmm.
I think that's how I say it. And it's Meechin Arctic Single Malt Whiskey Ocean Heart Batch 2. And let me tell you about this.
Okay.
Meechin is a remote island, and our core single malt whiskey is made from desalinated seawater.
Ooh, very
I
resourceful.
know, straight from the heart of the Arctic Norwegian Sea. So I am so excited because while I was there, I told you I drank some of that water, and it,
Yes.
not the
Straight out of the
seawater,
glacier
but
filled
like
lake.
the water came out of the mountains,
Mhm.
created a river. I wouldn't put my feet in it. It was so cold. I was like, I'm gonna taste this.
Mhm.
And it tasted better than any bottled water I've ever had in my life. So I was like, oh, okay, these people are never going to be thirsty ever because like clean, delicious. Um, so I got some look at the color. It's like,
It you could tell that Norway is a cold slash Arctic country because that is lighter than white wine.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
again, because the whiskey infuses in and out through the heat cycles in the barrels, and that's why American whiskey is much darker
right. It changes color.
than Scotch, Irish whiskey, Scotch from Scotland, So
Right.
it's just like, oh man,
It is nearly clear.
yeah.
And I had this, I just, before we started, I just
Mhm.
peeled off the label. So I'm about to pour myself a little whiskey over ice. Do you have, wait, hold on. Last time we met, you said, do you want to see my ice molds or do you want it to be a surprise? So let's
Yes.
see this. I'm
For
so
our
excited.
pre-prod meeting, I said, I get so excited. I just want to like spill the beans. And I said, you want
Yeah.
to see my new ice molds? And you're like, no, show me on the show. So I was like, that's the right answer. Thank you for like reining me in.
Because you're the worst person.
I am. I just get
You
so
never get all the way to the
excited.
day where you're supposed to have the surprise.
No, no, because I just get so excited.
You're so excited.
Do you know, remember, of course you do. You're like, I carry my glitter around in little spell bottles.
Yeah, these little vials.
And now that we're recording this in September, and I would say spooky season is upon us.
It is.
I have little spell bottles.
Shut the actual front door. Where did you get those? I need them immediately.
I got them at Michael's. They're like chocolate molds, but one down. But don't worry, there's a pack of 6. So I got them, and so I dusted the rose gold shimmer powder into them, and then I sprinkled moonstone iridescent inside of it. So it's like there's gonna be more as it. So I'm just putting my little, and there's pinks and there's like eyeballs on them, and they just aren't they just the cutest little thing. So I have my own spell bottles. Of course, they're like pink chrome.
Those are amazing.
So good.
Michael's Halloween section this year was disappointed for me, but I knew you'd love it.
I would. I know, because it's all pink and sparkly and like disco balls and everything. And you're going to be like, God damn, Rachel, she likes it. And I was like, I do. It's so cute.
Yeah, you loved it immediately. As soon as I saw it, I was like, Rachel, would you come and look at this?
Go fill up your boo basket, babe. But I like black glitter. I like the Victorian era spookiness of things. I don't need to be like disco ball Halloween. Ooh, I just cork. So this bottle comes with a cork.
So does mine. Yeah, mine smells like.
So Yellowstone is small batch whiskey, and the nose. Let me see. Sweet caramel. A little spicy.
Mine's very vanilla.
Little oak, little vanilla here. I bought this from my local small owned liquor store called Lux Liquors here in Castle Rock. And he was very wonderful. He's like, this tastes like this has caramel notes in it. And because he was giving out free samples. And I was like, man, sign me up. I want a bottle. So shout out to Lux Liquors. And so over the ice we go. Oh, it is shimmery already.
I have that 20. I dusted my glass with the 24 karat gold. I love that cup, by the way.
It is. It's my favorite. It seems so very.
It's so cute. Clinkies.
Boom. Right here. Let me see what we got. It's a new whiskey for me. Ooh. Get a little brown sugar. Toasted nuts.
Ooh. Mine is kind of toasty as well. I definitely taste a little bit of vanilla.
Yeah.
That's really delicious.
I would say this has like a warm, like the tannins are lingering, but it's also sweet. So it's like, it has that like that after flavor that stays, but it's like, but that's where the sweetness lingers too, which I really do. Like, if you are what you eat, I am sweet.
You know what else I taste in mine? This is a weird thing I've not tasted in any other whiskey before.
Ooh, what's that?
Buttery cookies.
Ooh, Norway.
And it's not really sweet. It's like the kind of cookies I tasted over there.
Oh,
a little earthy.
Maybe that like different kind of peat tasting. God, I keep dropping everything.
But like sweet still. This is good. Ooh, this is good. This is not dangerous, like, but like after 15 minutes of drinking this, it will be.
Yeah, it'll just knock you right out. Knock your socks off.
My socks right off.
Go snuggle with a reindeer.
Oh, I love them so much. I love them so much that I ate one.
We're not going to judge another country on its choice of cuisine. I'm sure that is a renewable resource.
Locally sourced, organic meat, the happiest reindeer ever.
Yeah.
So
I would
delicious. Delicious. Well, let's get into it, Rach, because these are important topics that we're going to be talking about over the course of the next couple of months, since we got the looming election. We just had the debate. It has been a whirlwind since Kamala took over the nomination basically. And so we kind of both decided mutually, like, let's really get into the fact that women need to vote and why. Like, why is this so important?
Yes, I do believe in everyone's civic duties. Like the show has endorsed Kamala Harris, Tim Walz for president. However, to me, it's just important that people vote. And I'm going to explain why, especially women to
Yes.
vote. Because me, I'm
Yes.
like, we don't have to agree on everything. That's totally okay. I just know that as Americans, we are more alike than we are different. And maybe we want the bus to get to the same place, but we
Right.
just are going to get on a different bus on how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I feel about it. You, I believe, have quite a few American history degrees.
Yeah, I do.
And I am just a fan and self-educated of I'm really one to back up what I say. And so I always feel like I'm gonna be wrong. Maybe it's how I grew up. Like if someone says, "Oh, you're wrong," I'm like, "Okay, that must be correct. I must be wrong." Like
Right.
so I always, but also that has really helped me to like the internet is at our finger, all the information in all the world is at our fingertips. So it's like I want when I say a fact, Rachel doesn't ever bluff and she doesn't ever talk out of her ass. I can back things up with what I say, and I make sure that I know them as best to my knowledge inside and out before I go and take them to a debate, a discourse, and what have you.
Right.
But so history also a hobby for me, you know. So
Yeah.
but you know, I was as we were thinking of ideas for podcast episodes, and it just kind of brought to the forefront of my mind these two scenarios that we had in our own separate lives, but it
Right.
was kind of the same theme of like people don't know.
They have
It's
no
like
idea.
losing a part of our history. So for instance, I have a black male friend. We're going to refer to him as Tiki. And so we were kind of talking about when women got the right to vote and men got the right to vote, black men specifically. And I said, "Oh, he was like, white women got the right to vote before black men did." And I was like, "That is no way actually factually accurate." And this is not to throw shade on anyone that doesn't know their own history. That's okay. But of course, this man would think that white women got the right to vote before black men.
Especially with our history as a
Yes.
country. Like that
Yes.
makes sense that he thought
Hmm.
that for
Yes.
sure. I don't
Absolutely.
blame him at all. Our history is so fucking whitewashed. Like it makes absolute sense that he would think that.
He was just like, of course, white women would get more in the eyes of law before black men. However, let us just put this into perspective. 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave women, specifically white women, the right to vote. So
Right.
it was just this kind of
Specifically white
white
women. Let's
women.
very much clarify.
Mhm. So it was just very like, oh hey, like I maybe we just take because I know, you know, a lot of people know, we just take it for granted that everybody knows what we know. And that is really not the case. And do you want me to say the for instance that I remembered that you were telling me about, or do you want to take that one away? Mhm.
Um, no, you go ahead
Yeah.
because you're the one. When I told you, you were the
Mhm.
one. You definitely were like, wait a minute, because
Yes.
I didn't really like um put the two things together. Because let's just, you said earlier, I have a history degree. I focused on the Civil War specifically. So
Yes. And this happens post Civil War. So, okay.
right,
So, you were in a conversation with a friend of yours, the Deuce, and
right,
he loves history as well. But he had
yeah,
made a misstatement
yeah,
saying that because women had the right to vote, prohibition passed.
right.
And we were Marco Poloing, and I was like, that's not true. You need to correct him that it's not true because
Mhm.
prohibition, 18th Amendment, and then again, women's right to vote, women's suffrage was the 19th Amendment. So
Right,
women did not, they did campaign for prohibition. However, they could not vote to pass its ratification to the Constitution. So I
right.
was like, you know, if he, and that's, again, this isn't to throw shade at anyone who has been wrong, but I was like, I want him to be most right about his facts as well.
For sure.
and not have
And
this.
he's a really, really smart man.
Mhm,
So it is something that, like, when he said it,
mhm,
I sort of just accepted it because he is very smart.
mhm.
But you were like, no. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. Like,
Yeah.
it was just one of those things where, like, I just assumed that somebody was right just because of their level of education. And that, again, this is not something that we need to be doing. We need to be reading on our own the real history of the United States. So we're going to bring all of those facts in
So,
today's show, and
and
then
we're not
people can use these and go do more reading on their own.
correct. So, what we're going to talk about today is kind of the history of women's voting rights in America, and specifically how the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage, women's rights to vote, came to pass. So, again, this isn't to throw shade at anyone who has been a little bit historically inaccurate in their facts, but it's also to be like, hey, I don't want to take it for granted that everybody knows. I took, it's important to me, so I know, but it's also up to me to pass that information along to other people as well, so then they know. So, like, I remember earlier this year before, when it was still Biden, Trump, and you were like, I don't even know if I'm going to vote. And I was like, Jackie, you have to vote. I don't give a shit who you vote for, but you have to vote.
You weren't wrong either. Like, it was something that, like, I didn't want to do, and I really did think about everything that I had learned about the suffragist movement, and it just made me feel like I don't have a choice.
Yes, like I don't have a choice to not vote. I may not like my
Right.
options. I like my options this year now.
Yeah,
However,
for sure.
it's like because, and we'll go into it, what the women have gone through to give me the privilege of saying, yeah, yes, I want to vote or no, to be so nonchalant about voting
Mhm.
is in honor of those women. I will
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
vote. And we're going to get into it because I have been doing
Yeah.
a lot of research the past couple of days. So
You really took your Adderall for this one.
I I sure did. So
Yeah.
before we women gained the right to vote, they lacked many rights, including property rights. So married women were not allowed to own or inherit property. They had to give any money they earned to their husbands. So any money that a wife earned was her husband's, and so she couldn't hold on to it for any reason. If he was bad with money, that's just too bad. So any financial rights, married women were not allowed to control their own finances or enter contracts or lawsuits unless their husband agreed to they had to do it. So legal rights, married women were considered legally dead in the eyes of the law. Husbands had legal power of their wives, including the ability to imprison or beat them. Obviously
Or
women were not.
rape them.
Yep. And so obviously it's like whatever the husband wanted that he was allowed legally to do, he could
Chattel.
decide for her. Yes. So obviously women were not allowed to vote. Occupational rights, most occupations were closed to women. Custody child rights. So if you were divorced, child custody laws favored men, giving absolutely no rights to the women whatsoever. And education rights, women were not encouraged to go to college. So those are kind of the things that are on the line. So let's take it back to the 13 colonies.
Yeah.
So when I say we did some history, let's the history of it and why and where it came from and why it was such a fight. We're going to start all the way the American colonies beginning.
Right.
So 1769, the early American colonies based their laws on the English common law, which said, quote, by marriage, the husband and wife are one person in the law. So
Like, as soon as you get married, you belong to him. You
you
are
become
no longer a human being.
you become one legal entity, and that is your husband has all the rights. So the very being and legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage or is at least incorporated into that of her husband's, who's under wing and protection. She performs everything. Keep in mind, like when we get married, we lose our family name to take their family name. That is
And
kind of
here's
like
the
the
thing
tradition of it.
that, yeah, and that family name belonged to who? The father.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we never really, there aren't any women's last names in existence.
True.
They all belong to men.
So it's just a given that women will give up their identity to then take the identity of their husband. So that is under coverture. So quote unquote coverture. That once married, a woman's property belongs to her husband and she has no legal rights. Coverture was brought over by the British colonists who followed the traditions of English common law. So that's kind of the baseline of where it starts. English settlers come over into the 13 colonies, and then it's just kind of like English common law over here. And that's kind of the base of where our laws begin. So,
Right.
like I said, once a woman gets married, she's no longer a legal being. And like, again, she becomes her husband. She forgets her last name. What are these long lasting last names for
Right.
other men's families? So,
Yeah. And then the Revolutionary War happens, and that starts. And we, 1776, declare our independence. One of our founding fathers, John Adams. Abigail, his wife. By the way, if you ever have a chance to look up their portraits, John is a fucking gremlin compared to Abigail. Like, she is beautiful.
So out of his league, I know.
Dude, so out of his
and
league.
Let me say, women, they couldn't really provide for themselves on their own as adults. So I'm like, they gotta marry gremlins.
They had to. It didn't matter.
To.
And it only mattered how much money that man had. It did not matter what they looked like or if there was love. So Abigail wrote, she's living in Massachusetts, and she wrote to her husband, John Adams, who's a member now of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, in the new Code of Laws of Revolutionary Governments. She urges him. She's basically like, bro, please don't forget that we are already voting when you go and write your new laws. Like, we have been voting. There are records of women voting prior to the Revolutionary War when Britain was in charge over here. She tells him in a letter that we still have, you can look it up in the Library of Congress, you can see her handwriting, where she says, do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Ladies like her, Abigail wrote, will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. And this dude, this motherfucker, writes back that basically, like, men are not going to give up that kind of power. He writes back and tells her that, like, sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
So
he's not gonna do it.
He's not going to do it. Yeah. So,
because they knew the power that voting had, and they didn't want to give it up.
So they didn't want women to have, God, for if the thing is that they were just perpetuating bullshit so that they could keep power, because God forbid you let women have any say in leadership abilities.
Yeah, you can run the household, home and hearth, but you can't do anything more than that. So in 1777, all original 13 colonies, now states, passed laws taking away women's rights to vote.
Taking
it away.
They
had it. And then they're like, no, you don't have it. It's only to male landowners, white, so it's just really like, that was something I learned where I was like, they voted to take away a woman's right to vote. So it was like, oh, I thought we never had it. It was just kind of this ongoing thing of like, maybe could we? It was like, no, you had it and they took it away.
Right. And men say all the time, oh, we gave you the right to vote. We gave you the vote, as if it's some fucking gift. No, motherfuckers, we had to fight for that shit back.
Yes.
I'm mad about it.
And then I know exactly. So that was under the Articles of Confederation. And so we moving forward to 1805, Martin versus Commonwealth of Massachusetts sets a legal precedent that married women did not have separate political identities or citizenships from their husbands under, again, the law of coverture. So it was I
want to talk about this just for a second, because these two people were married. Okay. And the woman, Anna Gordon Martin, was married to William Martin. Now, Anna is the one who owned everything before she got married. And then she married this dude, and this dude's like, no, I don't want to be a loyalist. I want to back the Continental Congress. I want to go against Britain. So in doing that, they had to leave their property. And when they did that, they relinquished rights to that property. Well, they had a son, and the son went back to that property and was like, that's mine. It belonged to my mom. But because of the law of coverture, as soon as she was married to his daddy, it belonged to the dad. And because the dad decided to abandon it, that kid had no rights to that land anymore. And let's be very clear, this is a man fighting for land that belonged to his mother. But because
by
the
his father.
Right. But because the father made the choice to leave the land, and the woman can't.
Her family's land.
Yeah. Her family's land. Because she couldn't say no, because she doesn't exist. She's chattel at this point. She couldn't say no. She had to leave. She had no choice. She could remain a loyalist in her heart all she wanted. But because her husband wasn't one, because her husband was a revolutionary and he wanted to leave, she had to leave. And this kid lost his birthright to that land because of the
law
idea of coverture.
Of that. So again, women lose their identity in marriage.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for looking that up.
It heats me up, Rachel.
It does, because this has been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So I was like, everyone should be angry and upset about it. And this is why. Okay. So this is kind of where the women's suffrage movement kind of has its like starting line is 1848 at Seneca Falls. So again, like women have been kind of campaigning all the way at Abigail Adams before the Revolutionary. They really did want these rights, but we're kind of like, they're starting to organize now. So 1848, Seneca Falls Convention, 300 women and men signed the Declaration of Sentiments modeled after the Declaration of Independence. So the women of Seneca Falls call for all men and women to be created equal. This was a plea for the end of discrimination against women.
Yeah. So I have some facts about Seneca Falls and this entire thing. So first and foremost, this is a full 40 years after that first decision. In the meantime, women of all color and men kind of join together and they create an entire kind of group that are anti-slavery and pro voting rights. It's one group. Okay.
About, I think it's like black men,
black women, everybody in the United States. Slavery should end. Everybody should have a right to vote. What the fuck is happening in this country that this is not happening? And like, they're working on it. I can't remember how far before the Seneca Falls Convention occurred that. So FYI, there were no black women at Seneca Falls. Frederick Douglass, I think, was there, but there were no black women. Prior to the Seneca Falls Convention, there was another convention, a group of black women who were trying to fight for the right to become clergy members in the church. And their declaration is nearly identical to the Declaration of Sentiments. So it's very much the same fight, but it just seems like at this point, they need to separate their causes so that they can do one at a time. And again, it's 1848. So we are pre-Civil War. They're like really kind of trying to figure out what cause are we fighting for first.
I think that was a very shrewd political move as well, to be like, if you do all of this, it's too much and it's not going to get. So it's like, let's break it up and then fight for each thing individually.
Especially in the white man's patriarchal government. They had to really like figure out what they were going to fight for. So it was held in Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls over the period of 2 days. There was speeches, there was comedic relief. They had an entire couple of hours where a couple of women got up and literally did stand-up comedy about women's rights and about men running the government. I couldn't find some of, I was trying to find some of those jokes, but I didn't have time to find them, but
Yeah.
definitely something that I've read before and they were hysterical.
I
And
bet that
then
woman just crushed it.
just
Just to have that room in
crushed
stitches. Yeah.
it. Yeah. So you mentioned the Declaration of Sentiments
Mhm.
called for a long list of women's rights, access to education, job opportunities, power within the church, which is what those Black women were fighting for, and the right to control one's own property and money. And of course, the most important, our right to vote. So that last one, us voting, was actually the most controversial of them all. So controversial, Rachel, that there were women of the time who were against it. There was an entire newspaper article that I read that ended with, if we have the right to vote, how will we focus on raising children and taking care of the home? Are you kidding me?
Yes, I think looking back now, it's so easy to see like, oh yeah, it's so simple to be like, yeah, why wouldn't anyone just want the right to vote? But it's just like there were a lot of anti-suffragists
Yeah.
because I always say white women benefit from a white male patriarchal society, you know.
And that's what one of these articles talked about, is that if we start voting,
Mhm.
the men won't take care of us anymore. Like, it was just a whole thing. We
And
are going to lose our place in society.
And I think a lot of, especially when you've grown up in a society like this, and I'll check myself on it from time to time when something comes up, it's like you can have internalized misogyny. Like you can be brainwashed into that system to be like, oh
Mhm.
no, like to be, learn it against like your own self-interests because
Yeah.
you're so ingrained in that society that also because they almost didn't put it on the Seneca Falls Convention, and now that's the only thing we really remember it for. My, how
Yeah.
history tells. But it's just really like there is a lot of internalized misogyny as well, because a lot of anti-suffragettes were women who did
Yeah.
not want a right to vote, even though they are campaigning against their own best interests.
Right.
So there's a lot of like that within the party as well. So it's just like not everyone was ready, and women's voting, women's suffrage was a radical idea
It was.
that we just take it so for granted now. But
For sure.
yeah. So 1848 again. So New York State passes the Married Women's Property Act, and for the first time a woman isn't automatically liable for her husband's debts, say if he dies. It's not her responsibility anymore. She could enter contracts of her own. She could collect rents or receive an inheritance in her own right. And she could file a lawsuit on her own behalf. She became, for economic purposes, an individual for the first time in the eyes of the law. 1848.
Isn't that a miracle? And
Mhm.
that's something.
Yes.
It's
So,
crazy.
and then now we're past the Civil War. So 1870, 5 years
Right.
after the Civil War ended, I believe. So this is
Yeah.
5 years.
So after Seneca Falls,
Mhm.
after that 1848 decision, I just want everybody to know that pretty much that entire suffragist group refocused its sights on ending slavery
Correct.
for almost the entirety of that group.
Mhm.
Kind of came to a, not unspoken, there are letters between like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass, like this has to happen, and then this, that he played a very large role, I think, in that. It very much was like, okay, like if we're going to get everybody the right to vote, we actually have to free the people that they are considering animals first.
Yes.
So they refocused all of their efforts to the abolitionist movement, so that they could get all of those people free, so that all of those people could kind of come over and help with the suffragist movement. So go ahead.
Yeah, the suffragist movement helped Black men get the right to vote because they're
Yes,
like, once one pillar falls, the rest of them do too. So
that's right.
1870, 5 years after the Civil War ends, it's the 15th Amendment is ratified by the state, saying The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or unabridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. African American men may vote now, but women may not. So it just says you can't not vote because of the color of your skin or if you used to be a slave, but it doesn't say anything about on the basis of sex. So it's like we just kind of take it for granted. It's like, yeah, they're just talking about men here.
But
So,
if you got a vagina, shut up, basically.
so again, so 1870, America, maybe we have 25 states at that point. Louisiana Purchase happened,
Yeah.
So as the country is expanding, we still have the territories. We still have, they're not states yet, but they are territories, and they are being a population of influx of people to settle the pioneering West, the Wild West.
Wild West is currently happening.
So
like all of those movements, all of those Oregon Trail, like all of that is happening at this point after that.
Yeah,
occurs.
so when westward expansion is happening. So as the country was expanding, a lot of women had the right to vote in territories before they became states. So this happened because getting populations to move into the pioneering West wanted to look more enticing to settlers and different from the established status quo of the eastern states. So it was like, oh, you can vote out here because we don't have any laws yet. So set them up. So
Wild West.
Wild West. This is good in some ways and it's not in other ways. And I'm not saying the suffrage isn't good because obviously I'm here for it, but they took it away in 1777 and some states took it back when they became a right to be a state. So
right.
When statehood became an option for various territories, women's voting rights were then again revoked. So 1871. So we're going to talk about the state of Washington. So in the territory of Washington, women could vote to establish these judges, these tribunals, all like the government in which they want to be run by. So 1871, Susan B. Anthony, which we all here understand her name, and Abigail Scott Duniway led a crusade through the territory of Washington and helped to form the Washington Women Suffrage Association. Due to the group's constant protesting and pushing, full rights were given to women in 1883 by a bill that passed through the territorial legislature. But in 1887, the territorial Supreme Court overturned that law, stating that no female shall be given the right of ballot or vote. This happened because women voters were making sales of liquor more difficult with their votes, and the state's liquor lobby had fought hard to remove their voting rights. So
because they were like, these men are getting fucked up and beating the shit out of us.
And we don't want that.
I mean, genuinely.
Don't take all of our money.
Because men are violent when they get drunk.
Don't take all of our money that we have earned so hard and go do it at the bar, leaving me in like destitute, or come home and beat those women, So it's like, so they knew the voting power that women had and they lobbied against it so they could still get their large piece of the pie.
Yeah.
So there are some exceptions to this case, to these like pioneering rules. So Wyoming is known as the equality state, and the territory and state recognizes Wyoming as the first state to specifically give women the right to vote, which it did as a territory in 1869 and retained upon entering the Union in 1890. They allowed women to vote in local and state elections. However, federal elections were not allowed because, again, there was no universal women's suffrage. But Wyoming said, we're not coming in without our women, because they knew how important they were to settling the West, how much hard work they did on the homestead, of raising the family, of just actually doing the same work as a man. They were out on that Oregon Trail too, walking the whole way, you know what I'm saying, with a baby on their hips. So it's like
breastfeeding babies on the Oregon Trail.
Yes. So Wyoming settlers, they were like, we'll hold out. We don't need to be a state yet. So I'm going to give it up to Wyoming. So there's the equality state. They said, we're not coming in without our women. We'll wait you out, because we're in the middle of the country. We're going to be allowed in eventually. Yeah. So yes. And so then following in 1893, I'm going to give a big shout out to Colorado here. Colorado became the second state in the United States to grant women's suffrage and the first to do so as a voter referendum. Again, local and state elections only. So states were starting to give these small wins to women throughout the country. So, and then that really leads, like, you know, that whole Rolling Stone, it gathers more and more momentum, is like, well, they can do it. They can do it. New Zealand has let their women vote, you know, so why can't we? So again, it's like you plant an idea, and again, this some 50 years later, okay, we spark a match, and then it's like more women are like, yeah, why not? Yeah, why
Yeah,
not? Why
why
can't
not?
I?
It's about seeing the possibility, I think. It's about like, if you don't see it being possible, then your brain maybe can't wrap your head around it, which I think is why it's so exciting for Kamala to be running and for her very real chances of winning, because
Mm-hmm.
I really want the girls in this country to see that that is possible, because then as soon as they all see it,
Mm-hmm.
it's the end of the fucking white male patriarchy as we
And
know it.
and going back to Seneca Falls in 1848, it was like putting women's voting rights on the referendum was so controversial because it never had been maybe said out loud before.
Yeah.
Of like, yes, we want this as a whole. Gasp, clutch
Yeah.
pearls. Because
Yeah.
it's like, and now we're like, oh yeah, of course. Like it didn't ruin these certain states, you know, like they're doing just fine. So, you know, it's like, okay, it's not the downfall of society. The home
Yeah.
doesn't fall apart.
Right.
It's just, hey, I may not agree with my husband, so I want to vote in my own self best interest. And under the law, we are not one unified being.
It's just like, oh, look at that. Women can multitask.
Okay.
Surprise. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Because back to what your friend said, women did campaign for prohibition. They're a big reason why prohibition passed in the first place. However, we couldn't vote for it, but because of campaigning,
Mm-hmm.
they could.
Because of how powerful we are in the home. You know what? That might be why men are so scared of, like, especially back then. That might be why they were so scared. Like, shit, if they were able to do this and not have the vote, what the fuck are they going to be able to do with the vote? And look at us 100 years later.
Yes. Yes. 104 years later. So now
Whew.
we're up to 1920. The
Okay.
19th Amendment is ratified by 2/3 of the states and grants women the right to vote. It declares the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Finally, it's like you can vote because you're a woman. So, like, what was it, like 33 states or 36 states needed to ratify this? Because there are 48 states at this point. The last state to come into union was Arizona in 1912. So this is 1920. We have 48 states. 36 states have to ratify. 35 states have one state as a holdout, and it's the South. And the South has been very, very against women's suffrage. The
Mm-hmm.
West, Western states, hey, we got it. Our women have been voting for a while. North, that's where they started with Seneca Falls, New York. So South is this holdout. It comes down to Tennessee. And the state government of Tennessee didn't think that it would pass. So they called a special election and a special session to just vote it down and make it go away. So they were just like, fine, we'll vote on it. And then you guys can just shut up because they don't think it will pass.
Right.
And, and so the Tennessee state legislature is all white men. And it comes down to one vote. Women's suffrage passed by one vote.
One.
So I
And they
just
were
want to like,
just they were just waiting. There's no TV.
mhm,
There's nothing like that. Like, the only thing they have was a telephone, and like they have to wait for that news to come to them. They can't
yes,
watch it. They can't do anything. And they were just like bated breath.
the one vote it comes down to, because again, women have been saying we want to vote for at this point 50, so 60, 70 years at this point. So yeah, 68 years at this point. So the amendment ratification passes by one vote. A 24-year-old state representative named Harry Byrne because his mom wrote him a letter telling him to be a good boy and to vote for suffrage and to ratify the amendment. And this is really why it came down to this, because his mom was college educated and his family were landowners. And again, 15th Amendment has passed, men can vote. And he says, uneducated men who can't write one sentence can vote, but my highly educated mother can't. And he's like, this is that like disconnect that he's starting to have. And he was like,
Yeah.
why should someone who doesn't know what's going on, isn't abreast of the situation, who like his mom was very politically dialed in to the happenings of what was going on around her.
Yeah. And
And
he clearly listened to her and
Mhm.
had very informed and cognizant debates and conversations with
Yeah.
this woman. Like he probably
Mhm.
listened to her because he learned everything from her.
And so I'm wearing yellow jewelry today.
I
Very
know that's
cocktail rings of
right.
the day. Yes. So when these people came to vote, they kind of wore their vote on their sleeve, so to say. So red roses that the men were wearing means they were not in favor of suffrage and they were going to vote against it. And then men who were wearing yellow roses meant they were in favor of suffrage. And so you could see these like colors flip flop because, and a lot of these
Mhm.
representatives didn't want to vote for it because what if the men didn't like that? Their political futures were on the line with
Mhm.
this. And Harry Byrne was wearing a red rose the day before. He was not in favor of suffrage.
Right.
So he was like, he wasn't going to do it. And then at the last minute, he gets this letter from his mom telling him to be a good boy. And he is. And so he says, I want to vote. And so he says, yay. And then immediately they put that uh, constitutional amendment back on the train, back up to Woodrow Wilson's desk to be like, yes, we're going to do this
Right.
because there was an election coming up and women wanted to vote in it. So it had to be very, very timely.
Yeah.
So Um, now it comes to 3 years later, 1923. So the National Women's Party proposes a constitutional amendment. So our rights are fighting for our rights is not done with suffrage. So it says men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and in every place subject to its jurisdiction. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. This is the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. 1923, it does not pass. Over 100 years later, it has still not been ratified, and it has been introduced in every session of Congress since 1982. I'm a little peeved, but
I'm so annoyed by that.
so that would have been the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Yeah.
So now we have brought up to women now have the right to vote. However, this is why it's very important for me to vote. And I told you to watch some movies
Right.
to prep for this and why it is so important. And so
Right.
those movies are Suffragette, which does go over the England in the British women's voting suffragettes, but
Right.
also Iron Jawed Angels, which talks about Alice Paul and her hunger strike when she was imprisoned. But I want to talk about specifically what the women had to go through to get the right to vote. Because I have seen this on the internet when people are saying, oh, men gave you the right to vote. And I was like, hold on. No one gave us anything. We had
No.
to fight for it tooth and nail for decades.
To
And I
get it
want to
back.
and I'm going to touch briefly on what these women had to go through to get the right to vote. So there was a suffrage parade held in Washington, D.C. in 1913. And so women were marching, just like, and they're silent, doing like peaceful protests of just like, we want our right to vote. And so they are just marching in front of the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Mhm.
So,
They were marching to the White House
yes.
in this march.
So in Washington, D.C. in 1913. So this is still 7 years before the 19th Amendment has passed.
Mhm.
The police stood by when spectators attacked the demonstrators, the suffragettes, as they made their way down Pennsylvania Avenue, and Army cavalry troops eventually had to be dispatched to restore order. Over 200 women were injured and 100 women were hospitalized because of their significant injuries.
Mhm.
One witness said the women were spit upon, slapped in the face, tripped up, pelted with burning cigar stubs, and insulted by jeers and obscene language too vile to print or repeat. This was called the Night of Terror. So the
Yeah.
suffragettes who were arrested got 60 days in jail. And so when jailed, the suffragettes faced brutal treatments by guards and horrendous living conditions, including worm-ridden food and filthy water and bedding. The women demanded to be treated as political prisoners and went on hunger strikes while in jail. The jail superintendent called on their guards to, quote, teach the women a lesson. And when the suffragettes did go on their hunger strikes, the prison authorities subjected them to force feeding of milk and raw eggs by putting a feeding tube up their noses that went down into their stomachs.
Yep.
So the suffragettes categorize this as a form of torture, which it absolutely was.
Absolutely. And they would like when it would happen, they would just vomit everything back up.
Yeah.
Some stuff does stay in your stomach even when you do vomit it back up, but they didn't care. They just kept doing
But
it to them.
the torture of trying to overfeed them, of putting the tube in general, and then taking it out quickly. So we'll get into that. So the suffragettes,
It was just horrific.
yeah.
To read about, let alone watch in these movies.
Mm-hmm. So the suffragettes categorize this as a form of torture. One suffragette died shortly after being force-fed in prison, and many had serious health problems caused by this force feeding for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So when suffragettes became sick after these force feeding treatments, they were released from prison until they recovered and then taken back to prison to finish their sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And many had secret transfers to lunatic asylums.
Yes. And that's where they were doing a lot of the torturing. They were, and like back then, they were doing more than that. They were doing electroshock treatment. They were doing ice, like forced ice baths.
Mm-hmm.
Like just horrific things. I think the one thing that really stuck out in my mind, and we talked about how women didn't have rights to children that they bore, the men had the rights. And one of the characters who's a real person, the husband, after she was arrested, would not let her back in the home. And prior to her being arrested, they had what seemed to be a very happy and loving marriage, and they had a small child. Well, she gets arrested,
she wants
and
to
he
have
kicks
the same thing, and he makes her homeless because she doesn't have any right to her homes, and he puts their spoiler alert, he puts their child up for adoption because she has no rights to it, and he can't take care of their
handle taking
child.
care of the child.
And that's the thing. It's like his love is based on her servitude to him,
how he benefits her, or how she benefits him. I apologize.
And at that point, once she says, I want the same, he was like, you can't have that. And then he turns into a real dick. But real quick, back to these women who are jailed and force fed. So one woman had her hands shackled to the top of her cell, forcing her to stand all night. The guards also threatened her with a straitjacket and a buckle gag.
That was in the movie.
So this is, So one woman was slammed down on the arm of an iron bench twice. One lost consciousness after her head was smashed into an iron bed. One, after seeing the assault, suffered a heart attack and didn't get medical attention until the following morning. And all the suffragettes were denied visitors or to see a lawyer. So they were also, I mean, it's always like taxation without representation because we don't have the right to vote. And then it's also like, oh, if your husband says he's not going to get you, you have to sit in prison. Like there was a scene in, I think, Suffragette where one of the women was wealthy and she got married and the husband comes to like bail her out of jail. And she says, now write a check for all of my friends. And he's like, no. And she doesn't have any right to her money. And like, so she doesn't have any right to her money. She's like, it's my money. And he's like, it's my money now.
Yeah.
So it's like voting has more than just one right to vote. It's like, what did we gain after that? the Equal Opportunity Credit Act 1974, where women could so the
Get their
Equal
own
Credit
credit cards.
Opportunity Act says it does away with the practice of banks requiring single, widowed, or divorced women to bring in a man along to co-sign any credit application. Because before that, we couldn't buy a house on our own. We couldn't have a bank account on our own. We couldn't have a credit card on our own. We couldn't start a business on our own.
This is not that long ago. This
50
is
years.
my mom not being able to do it. Your mom not being able to do it all by herself. That's infuriating.
Yeah.
Because my mom wears the fucking pants in the house. That's how infuriating. You're going to rely on Dell when Diane is the boss? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate that, like, don't ever, ever let anyone tell you that men or the government gave you the right to vote. They withheld it with fear and assault and torture. And what those women had to go through just to be given the right to vote. And then they were spat upon, threw hot cigars at them. And it's like, they are sexually assaulted. And the police stood by. So don't ever have them tell, like, men are protectors. Men didn't protect these women.
No.
Men were assaulting these women.
Yes.
So it's like, when they say, oh, they're protectors. No, you're not. You only give a shit about the gaze of another man.
That's it.
You're not here. You're not it. They've never been, you can be under the law of their protection of their husband, but it's like, what if you don't agree? He can turn you out and make you homeless and sell your child off without you at that time. Okay. So that's my timeline. I just also want to say, I know you're going to get into some stuff, but why voting is so important. I just want to be like, the Supreme Court decision in 1973. This is a really big political issue right now because, like, it's a woman's right to choose. So 1973, it's with the Roe v. Wade decision. The U.S. Supreme Court declares the Constitution protects women's right to terminate an early pregnancy, thus making abortion legal in the U.S. This is 2 years ago, 2022. The Supreme Court rules that the Constitution does not confer any right to abortion, thus overruling Roe versus Wade, 1973, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, 1992, and setting off waves of protest across the U.S. So if the government had taken rights away from us before, they can do it again. And we know how serious this is. So that's
right.
Those are mine.
And since its repeal, 26,000 women have lost their lives to dangerous pregnancies because they were denied health care. And on top of that, 64,500 women have had to carry their rape and incest babies to term in the states that have taken away our right to health care.
And it's still, I forget the acronym for it, but they were literally in front of the Supreme Court because this stuff that's happening in Idaho. How sick does a woman have to be before abortion care is given?
That's wild to me. That's
how
crazy.
Sick does she have to be? How septic does she have to be? Miscarriages can take weeks. And if they go septic, how septic can she be? How sick does she have to be before you can
save her life? Like, it doesn't, if she is septic, the baby is not going to live. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So
what are you talking about? These are women who, if they're going septic, these are women who wanted their children.
Yes.
That's horrific. And you know what? That actually leads me to my next point. My own personal story that I had happen today. We had the debate, and the man that I am dating,
soon to be formerly dating,
I don't even know what's going to happen at this point, but I don't know. I'm not hopeful for him because my boundaries are set and I don't feel safe anymore. We started having a conversation about the debates. I know that he's sort of a middle of the road conservative, but
that he says
he very much made clear that he was not going to vote for Kamala and is leaning towards voting for Trump. And I made very clear to him that my rights as a human being are on the line, and it doesn't feel like very safe for Trump to be elected again. And he said something along the lines of, I don't agree with them politicizing abortion, but I also don't agree with late-term abortions. And my response was, well, there aren't any late-term abortions by people who don't want to have kids. Like,
correct.
right, like late-term abortions are for healthcare reasons, to save the mother's life or to not make the mother carry a dead baby. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I told him, I
Or
was like,
there's fetal anomalies where the baby is
like,
not going to
just,
live.
yeah, exactly. And I said to him, he was like, well, there are still 14 states where you're free to get an abortion. And so that infuriated me. Okay. And then at that point I was like, okay, let's look at it from this point. What if I'm a mother of 4 young children? I find myself pregnant and I can't afford to travel to any of those states to pay $1,000 to pay another $1,000 to have an abortion, because I can't afford to have this. It's not even that I am pregnant and I'm excited about my baby. I cannot afford to have this child. And he said, well, I would advise you to prevent getting pregnant. And I was like, oh, you would advise me to prevent getting raped? And he really didn't have anything to say to that, because my next statement was, it really sounds like you're talking from a place of white supremacy. And that is so fucking unattractive. And then click. Because absolutely no man in the entire country should have a fucking opinion about what any woman has to go through with a pregnancy and having to decide to get an abortion. Because absolutely zero, there might be 1 in 1 million women who are able to even fucking afford using abortion as a birth control method. That's fucking ridiculous. They cost $1,000. They are not cheap, because our fucking medical insurance does not pay for them. They just don't pay for them.
Most abortions are by married women who there
Right.
are fetal anomalies, or they're just like, we can't, another mouth to feed. So it's like, it's not by these young women who don't know any better that people like, just keep your legs closed. I'm like, are you telling women to stop fucking their husbands? Because I'm sure the husbands have something to do with that. But also, say abortion tourism, say you're going to go to
wild.
I didn't make that up, but it's like, you're going to go to these states. How long do you have to wait? Because the wait in Colorado, because we're like the first line from the South, is coming in, and it's like, our abortion providers are overwhelmed, our doctors are overwhelmed. And so it's like, if you're in that window that you can get an abortion, now you have to wait, which might put you over,
oh my God. And then you're at fucking 4 or 5 months pregnant because you have to wait in line.
A later term abortion, but they're having to do so because no one wants to be pregnant longer than they have to be pregnant, especially someone, whether it is for birth control, which is totally fine, or for a fetal anomaly where the baby is not developing,
or they were
properly.
raped, or incest. Like
it needs
what
to be,
the fuck?
Yes. So anyways, they're going to, this is like going into a different thing, but it's like,
but not really, because it's very, very,
it goes back to him being saying, I don't want this to be politicized. Well, they're politicizing it by taking it away. We weren't talking about it because we thought the Supreme Court had given us that right. And so we were like talking about it in the shadows with our girlfriends here and there. But again, like these husbands of these women who want these babies, who are going to get ill, their wives are dying, their wives are getting sick. It's like, abortion is a men's issue too. It's like, and birth control is a men's issue too. If you don't want to have a baby, make sure you wear a condom. Ask what sort of birth control she is. So if he's like, oh, you just try not to get pregnant, I'm like, so man in your life, you're for over-the-counter contraception and free contraception. So you're into funding those programs.
So you're willing to go get a vasectomy?
Yeah, they're reversible. So it's like women's issues are men's issues too. They do affect them. I don't want to leave out all of the husbands who are worried about their wives and their unborn children that they want, but have no ability to live if they are forced to be born,
Yeah.
And so it's just like I worry about them and their wives. And then but I think a lot of men's eyes are opening to be like, oh shit, this affects me too. And if I don't believe a woman should have, an abortion for birth control, it's like, yeah, but you're also taking that right away from your very sick wife as well. So it's like, it's it's for everybody, and these issues do affect everybody. And he is coming from a very privileged thing to be like, it doesn't matter to me, it doesn't bother me, why don't you go do that? I was like, there are so many factors that go into it, and he's never had to even think about it a day in his life, and that comes from a very privileged place. And I was like, go ahead, but if you're going to vote against my best interest, thank you, no.
Yeah, that's exactly how you make me feel unsafe. When you say shit like that. You are not a protector. That's for goddamn sure. There are two kinds of men in this world, Rachel. The men who protect us, women, and the men we need protecting from. And he went from protector to somebody I feel like I need protecting from. And it's so fucked up because I have such strong feelings, and there is no way for me to go back from that.
There is almost this parallel between your story and the story in the Suffragette movie of Carey Mulligan's character. As soon as she had a voice of her own, her husband was like, absolutely not. So it's like, as long as you were hot and fun.
Right.
And then he's like, oh, well, what about this? And it's like, what I truly think in my heart of hearts is he's like, oh, I'm thinking about voting for Trump. No, he's not. He is going to vote. And he's
going to
watering it down so he can keep you around and keep stringing you along.
That's exactly what I said. I said, what I hear when you egg me on and you push me to a place where I am feeling very passionate about what I'm saying, and you see the emotion in my face and you hear the emotion in my voice. What is happening in my head is you are saying you're not going to vote, but what you're really doing is telling me you're not going to vote, and then you're going to go vote for Trump, who absolutely is going to push to take my rights away, and you are not protecting me as a human being. And that is infuriating. And it is so unattractive. So unattractive.
And my biggest thing is that when they're like, oh no, we're not going to go for a complete ban of abortion across the United States, because they're like, oh, we just gave it back to the states. Well,
why?
Certain states have codified it in their state's constitution. I think Kansas was like, no, abortion will be on the ballot, like Oklahoma, like we're going to put this in our state constitution. And so I was like, okay, certain states want it, that's fine. Then why don't you just leave it at that? Republican Party, why don't you? So you do want a nationwide ban. You don't give a shit about states' rights.
It doesn't make sense to me why we need to even take it back to it doesn't calculate in my head. Why do we have to take it back to the states for people to vote on what I'm allowed to do with my body between me, my partner, and my doctor? That part my head cannot wrap around it.
Yeah.
So we made it about abortion at the end, but it is what it is because that's what's happening today.
Yeah. And I just want to say, when you go, it's between your body, your doctor. I was like, the Fourth Amendment Constitution protects the right to privacy. It's like, it's in there already.
Yeah.
So it's very frustrating. I should be a constitutional scholar at this point.
I mean, we both are constitutionalists, both of us.
Yes. And I'm happy to have it be a living, breathing document that we change. And I don't know, ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and give us the 28th Amendment, please.
Please, the equal
Please.
rights, and like literally, okay, we didn't even get a chance to talk about this because we were talking about like women's rights to votes and right to vote and like what happened with the suffragists and everything, but we didn't talk about after they finally gave us back the right to vote. We didn't talk about how, well, white women, yes, were given the right to vote. It wasn't until 45 years later that President Johnson, after Kennedy was killed, that
Assassinated.
he finally was able to like close the chapter on just denying black people the vote. Because after the 15th Amendment, after the 19th Amendment, lawmakers, people who were running the polls were making it impossible for black people to vote intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
They were, in order to stop the black vote, they were charging poll taxes, so you had to pay to vote. They were giving literacy tests to black people because they knew these are black people who are 1 to 2 generations separated from slaves,
Mm-hmm.
slaves who were outlawed from learning how to read. So of course they didn't have the opportunity. And then they're also going to segregated schools. So they were giving them literacy tests. And then they were also creating these grandfather clauses. So, like, oh, if your grandfather had the right to vote, then you could vote. But, like, that's the loophole, right? So, like, none of their grandfathers, except for if they were descendants of white slave owners who were raping their own slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had to prove that, which is fucking traumatic. And then the shit that they're resorting to now is what was happening at the polls then is
Mm-hmm.
just outright intimidation. So finally in 1965, 8 years before Roe, they gave the all black Americans the right to vote with the Equal Rights Amendment. But it's still,
With the
as you
Civil
said,
Rights Amendment, yeah.
civil rights amendment is that this is not codified in our Constitution.
And I just really want to say the 24th Amendment was the elimination of poll taxes, which means constitutionally they are not allowed to charge to anyone to go to the polls, which was keeping people that were of limited means away from the polls. And that was ratified January 23rd, 1964. This is not ancient history.
No,
This
no,
is
my mom
this is
was
recent.
10.
Yeah. Yeah.
My
My
mom
mom was
was
10.
my
Mhm.
mom was 10.
Our parents, not our grandparents, our parents are alive when the Constitution is still getting amended.
It makes me so emotional that I want to cry. It makes me so emotional. I'm so infuriated by so many people's lack of knowledge of how close this is in our timeline of humanity of America.
I just want to say, just to wrap this up, that the last constitutional amendment that was ratified by the states was the 27th Amendment for financial compensation for the Congress that happened in May 7th, 1992. We were 9. The Constitution is still growing and it can still happen. I'm just saying, anyway, get out and vote because of what those women did for you and the price that they paid with their lives, with their bodies, with their mental health, all of it, because they fought a lot for us. And I'm going to give 2 takeaways right now. I know we talked about this earlier in the show, but I encourage anyone listening to watch the movie Suffragette, which came out in 2015. And it stars Carey Mulligan, Helena Bonham Carter, and Meryl
Yeah.
Streep. And then also, I've only seen this movie once, but I can literally see this force feeding scene in my mind. It's called Iron Jawed Angels. It's this
Let
2004 American historical drama film starring Hilary Swank as suffragist leader Alice Paul. And the movie does show the force feeding of these women while in prison. It is graphic, but it needs to be seen.
It is graphic. Just like you, I can see it in my head. I only needed to see it once. It may like I will never not vote because of what I saw.
Because of
I will never not vote. And my takeaways is I think we all as women this year, we need to be wearing our yellow roses on
Yes.
election day. I
I'm
think we
wearing
need
I'm wearing white today because white was a suffragist movement, but also
yep,
because in the sepia tones of the papers at the time, white would pop and you would see them across the black ink on the newspaper. So I'm wearing white
yeah,
today with my yellow jewelry, just in solidarity of the yellow roses that
yes.
suffragists wore for their cause. But yes. Any last thoughts, Jackie, before we get into the spellbound portion?
That really was my last thought. I think we need to be wearing yellow roses this year. I think
Yes.
it's so important. We need to go out, get ourselves a little yellow boutonniere, slap it on our chests, go cast our vote, even if it doesn't matter. I actually have one other thing. I have
Mhm.
one other thing.
Mhm.
He's not going to know who you vote for.
That's
He's not
right.
going to know. You
Hmm.
can go in that voting booth and cast your vote for whoever you want to vote for. And you can tell him that you're voting one way, and then you can vote for your bodily autonomy if you want to. And I encourage you to just keep it to yourself. You can be who you want online, you can be who you want, and to everybody else, to your whole friend group. But I encourage you to vote to ensure that our rights as women and your daughter's rights moving forward continue to be our rights.
Hmm.
And that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. Amen. Oh, Jackie, thank you so
I'm
much.
emotional.
I know it gets me like my heart has been hurting, but also so proud, but also so angry these past couple of days as I've been researching this episode. Like, oh, I'm hot. But
I
you're
am
ready to lighten the mood.
vexed.
Let's see. Let's see what spirit has
I
for
don't
us
know if this
today.
is going to lighten the
I don't
mood. I'm not going to
know.
lie.
Hmm.
Because here's the thing, I've had a day. I personally have had a day in
Hmm.
relation to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We've been reading about this for the past couple of days. We've been getting even more emotional. The more we read, the more we see, the more we learn. And it's just one of those things. Like I'm shuffling with emotion in my heart and just tears like trying just right in my throat. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
right in my throat.
Because it's so important. And
It
it's
is
like we
so
wouldn't be
important.
getting this visceral reaction if it wasn't important to us.
We're so empathetic too that we see that and we imagine our own selves in those positions as and we understand how severe and serious what they went through was in order for us to have the rights that they're trying to take away from us today
Hmm.
in 2020 fucking 4, bro. So let's see what the cards have in store.
I'm ready.
I'm so I don't know. I've been emotional all day. I think that's my problem.
No, I was just Googling like men's suffrage amendment, which just takes me back to the 15th Amendment that said like all men can vote. So when we ask like these men in our lives, like, okay, when did men get the right to vote? And it's like technically the 15th Amendment, but they could vote before that. So it's almost like it's just granted that it's just white men. And it's like we just know when black men were given the right to vote, which was the 15th Amendment, you know?
Right.
So
And
it's
that's
like,
it.
yeah. I was like, okay, so like, were you guys force fed? Were you guys tortured? Were you guys held as political prisoners?
Black men were, but not men
Yes,
as a whole. Like
correct.
all
Mhm. I'm
right. It's
talking
white
about
men
white
who've
men.
always been in a place of privilege.
Hmm.
Which I hate being like that. Like I don't want to be
I don't want to shit
uh
on them, but also it's
I
like,
don't.
if we're gonna tell history right,
Yeah.
that's who was writing history,
Yeah.
you know?
Especially back then.
That's why who was, again, it was up to 24 men in a Tennessee state legislature. Came down to
Yeah.
one man.
One man who
One
fucking
one man who listened to
fine
his mom, and if his he hadn't listened to his mom, who knows when like women's suffrage would have happened again.
So the first card
Yes.
is the sun, but it's reversed.
Okay.
Negativity and sadness.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the sun represents. It's just the clouds of the are sort of like blocking the rays when it's upside down like this. And it feels difficult to be optimistic, which that
Wow.
definitely
That's
makes a ton of sense.
literally how I feel sometimes.
I just, especially like right now, because I feel like,
We remember the 2016 election.
yeah,
We
it
are
was,
cautiously optimistic.
yes, but we're realistically
It,
optimistic
it's
in
hard
it.
to
But
be.
it's been really, really hard. I'm just trying to stay positive in
Mhm.
this because I just feel like constantly I personally am being attacked, even though nobody's saying my fucking name.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm so worried about what's going to happen to my daughter because we are women of a certain age,
Mm-hmm.
as Mrs. Francis would say.
Yes.
We are aging gracefully. We
Absolutely.
are
I've
women
never
of
been
a certain
hotter.
age.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And like it just seems like they might not apply to us, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a child who is 20, 19.
We care about, I may not have children, but I'm invested in the future of women
Yeah, but you have
because
nieces.
I do have nieces. And I'll be honest, I am 40 wonderful years old. And I was like, as we struggle with aging, of course, but I was like, I am aging out of having the age where I could have children. And I was like, I've never been so excited to get old and to be like, oh, I don't have to worry about this. But it doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to worry about the young women that are behind me and to make sure
Right.
that they are set up for success to the best of my ability.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. So the next card is the Hermit. And that has to do a lot of contemplation. And this card represents the search for truth and inner guidance. It's just time for self-reflection. It's time for you to really like take in the information that you have at your fingertips. And it might take self isolation. It might take um, really looking inward so that you can understand the truth of what is happening and where you kind of want to look
Mhm.
forward in the world. And then the
I don't think
final
we've
one,
ever had that card before.
we've never had this card before.
Ooh, spirit.
We, yeah, we've never had the Hermit. Contemplation, inner guidance, and
Mm-hmm.
the search for truth. And then the final card is the Page of Wands. First of all, look at this card. These
Ooh,
cards are
that's very
so
powerful.
beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So
Black deck
so
tarot.
beautiful. But the Page of Wands um represents exploration, freedom, and excitement. Like
Ooh,
you're on the
chill.
brink of something new.
Mm-hmm.
Get excited about it. There's discovery, there's enthusiasm. So this is such an interesting like
Cool.
pull of the cards. So
It feels like certain ways that I have felt emotionally that I have around this subject that I have had a hard time articulating. It's like, here you go.
yeah, yeah, like
Like
this
to look
subject
inward to,
makes me so sad.
yes, it does make me sad.
What happened today between me and him?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad. This is saddening. This what is happening? The fight that we have to fucking it is 2024. Why the fuck am I still fighting for something that we should have already dealt with 50 fucking years ago? Sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Sadness. Like that is exactly the current like temperature of of the state of our country for sure. For sure.
Mm-hmm.
The Hermit, oh god, this search for truth, this contemplation. We're so sad. We're searching for like answers. Why is this happening? I just said that. Like, why is this happening? We've already been through this. We're learning the history. Why do we have to keep going through this and learning the history? We're looking for some kind of guidance.
And
But it's
why do
almost like,
you have to keep having the same fucking conversation with these men over and over and over again?
yeah, why?
Mm-hmm.
Bitch, why?
Yes.
It
Yes.
doesn't make any sense. My brain is not calculating. But then this page of wand comes out and it's like, you know the direction. You know where you're going. Look at him. He's like already going. He's got his walking stick. He's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Standing in
where
his
you're
power.
going.
Mm-hmm.
You're ooh. Oh, I just got chills because you said that to me on Marco Polo earlier when I told you that story. Standing in your power.
Mm-hmm.
You're standing in your power. You're holding your boundaries. You're standing in your power. And I feel like us as women in America, we have to right now stand in our power so that we can move towards our freedom.
Because we're not going back.
We're not fucking going back, bitch.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you know what? I have nothing else to say after that. Good job.
Thank you. I do want to say that even though like it does feel very discouraging about like, but look how far we've come. And I know we have a lot farther way to go.
Yeah.
However, I just want to say like feel hopeful for the future
Yes.
because and also it's
Definitely.
like yes, I honor those women who came before me to vote, but also it's like I'm not going to um take that privilege and honor for granted and I'm going to move us forward the way they moved us forward. So it
Right.
was easy for me and I'm going to make it easier for the next woman behind me and the next group of girls and everything.
Yeah.
So
I feel like
I
it's
feel
so
hopeful as well.
yeah, I feel like it's so poignant too that we are at 100 years later and we're right now fighting for our rights again.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know that those ancestors are watching us and giving us the strength that we need because of what they went through. That energy is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it in the fact that there are so many of us out in the ether, out on Beyonce's internet with our
Yes.
mouths wide fucking open, not afraid of what any man fucking thinks about what we're fucking saying. We're
Mm-hmm.
taking back our power. We're fighting for our rights and we're not going to be stopped. And if they could see us now,
Mm-hmm.
they would be so proud of us for continuing the fight.
Yes, I agree. So I can't add anything better than that, Jacqueline. I know that's right.
My
In the
God.
words of you,
It's
I know that's right.
I know that's right. You know,
Well, yes, Jackie, thank you once again for joining me on this very special and in-depth episode of Whiskey Bent
spellbound with black.
and Whitefield. Love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.